there, explorers. Justin here. Man, that museum was so cool. All the exhibits about television and the movies were super interesting. And the guided audio tour was very informative. And can you believe it was available in 10 different languages? Well, of course there are so many different languages spoken here in Queens. After all, people from all over the world live and work here. But I was definitely surprised to see so many businesses and government offices using different languages. It's not something I see all the time. And seeing all of these different cultures and languages coexisting in one place, I got to wondering, what is the relationship between language and culture? And how does cultural diffusion impact language? Let's find out. Neighbors saying hello to each other, a sign advertising the services a business offers, and the paperwork that needs to be filled out in order to get a library card. What do these all have in common? They rely on language, a system of communication used by a nation or community, and it can be written, spoken, or even signed. Language allows us to communicate ideas and express emotions to other people. So, what is the connection between language and culture? Well, for cultural groups, language helps keep the group intact by helping to pass on cultural values and identity. Take my friend Rohan. One of his most cherished possessions is the book of recipes his grandmother passed along. It contains a list of ingredients and steps needed to create the traditional Indian foods that his family loves. But language also allows us to identify and connect with others who have a similar cultural background. Think back to our visit to the cultural enclave of Little Egypt. Many of the residents spoke Arabic, the traditional language of their cultural group. Why would new migrants who spoke Arabic be drawn to this part of town? For starters, it would allow them to communicate with their neighbors. And people in the neighborhood who spoke both English and Arabic could help ease their transition into the new country. Plus, there's a pretty good chance that the people living in the neighborhood also share other cultural values and traditions. And for certain languages, it may even be possible to tell what region or town someone comes from. Languages have variations that are specific to particular regions, groups, or communities called dialects. Don't believe me? Take this fizzy, sweetened beverage. What do you call it? In some parts of the United States, it's called soda. In other regions, it may be referred to as pop. Some places just call it Coke, regardless of the brand. And hearing what people call this drink clues you into where they come from. Are there any words or phrases that are unique to where you live? Language can also be a way to reach out to members of other cultural groups. In fact, businesses do it all the time. Take Lucy, for example. She's an accountant with her own tax preparation service here in Queens. Her signs and advertisements are written in several different languages, and she employs people who are fluent in those languages. Lucy's business is really successful and keeps growing, which she attributes to her choice to embrace the different languages of the area. In her mind, it has helped build bridges to lots of diverse communities. Why is that? Well, the people in these diverse communities feel valued and appreciated by business owners like Lucy, so they're more likely to trust them and use their services. If shared language creates opportunities for members of the same cultural group to connect, spaces like Lucy's business that embrace multiple languages are great spaces for people from different cultural groups to connect. In our last lesson, we discussed cultural diffusion, the spread of different cultural elements. How might this impact language? Take a second to try to predict the answer. As more and more cultural groups encounter each other, they also encounter and experience differences in language. And this helps language change and evolve to meet the needs of people. How do processes like migration, communication, and colonization lead to language evolving? You might have heard a clumsy person referred to as a klutz, but the word klutz is Yiddish, a language spoken by Jewish individuals in Central and Eastern Europe. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as more and more Jewish individuals migrated to places like the United States and Great Britain, they brought their native language with them. And while they worked to learn the language of their new countries, their neighbors also adopted words from Yiddish, like klutz, schlepp, oy vey, and schmooze. Elements of pop culture moving from one part of the world to another also impact language. We often refer to something that is trendy or fashionable as cool. The phrase actually originated with jazz musicians and was eventually adopted by rock and roll artists. And as American culture became more influential after World War II, it spread to other parts of the world. Unfortunately, sometimes the evolution of language isn't always voluntary. Take places like the United States, Canada, India, South Africa, and many others where English is a commonly spoken language. In many of these places, it isn't the indigenous language. What might explain this? Well, all of these places were colonized by the English at different times during history, and the language was introduced to these places as part of the colonization process. Now, all of these examples are historic. Can you think of any examples of language evolving in your world? You may want to think about how things like social media platforms, entertainment, and even population changes are impacting language where you live. There's a good chance you thought of some specific examples to where you live. Maybe it was a term or phrase that was popularized on social media. Or if you live in a culturally diverse place, like Queens, you might have picked up words or phrases from another language. So, what does all of this mean for the future? In a world where globalization is moving faster, language is changing and evolving more rapidly than ever before. Thinking about the impact of cultural diffusion on language will allow you to engage with other cultures in a kind and respectful way. Plus, being open and receptive to different languages can be a real asset as you begin to think about career paths. And while there are benefits to language evolving to meet the needs of people, there are downsides as well. Indigenous languages are disappearing as other languages become more dominant. And there are fewer and fewer differences between regional dialects. But written or spoken language isn't the only way that we can communicate our ideas, beliefs, or values. Can you think of any other ways that people can communicate? What about art and music? Those are great examples of communication. These mediums allow different cultural groups to express what they believe or value without having to use words. Maybe they use art to convey their religious beliefs, or rousing music to show their national pride. And sometimes art and pop culture intersect to convey messages about cultural values, like this painting from Norman Rockwell. The painting, Freedom from Want, is designed to portray the importance of having basic necessities like food, shelter, and human companionship. Art and music also evolve and change as a result of cultural diffusion. Take this painting from Peruvian artist Marco Zapata, done in the 1750s. In it, he takes a scene and theme, the Last Supper, familiar to European Christians. But the food and drink that are included in the scene would have been more familiar to the indigenous communities of the region. This blending of European and indigenous cultural elements was designed to bridge gaps between the different groups of the region. Plus, art and music are able to overcome language barriers. Imagine walking past a block with lots of people. You're not sure what language they're speaking, but festive music is blaring. What do you think the mood is like at this get-together? Well, it could be that this is a happy get-together and that people are celebrating something. That's why art and music are such important elements of culture. They can provide a bridge, a point of connection when we might not be able to communicate with our words. I have to say, I am loving all of these really cool cultural experiences that Queens has to offer. And the subway here is such a great way to get around town. While you're going from one destination to another, you get to hear and see so many of the different languages, and the stations are filled with the sights and sounds of the art and music of diverse cultural groups. When it comes to culture, communication is so important. From passing along cultural traditions to finding community, to bridging language barriers. We can always adapt and adjust our communication to best meet the needs of a global community. The next time we see each other, we're going to examine the role of religion in culture. But until then, remember to keep exploring. Hey.